Welcome, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. We greatly appreciate your participation and hope you are all healthy and well. My name is Vanessa Scott, and I work in industry relations and innovation at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and I will be your moderator today. We are very excited to present the first in our Scripps Innovation webinar series for this year, hosted by the Scripps Corporate Alliance. And just a little bit of background about us. We are a division of University of California at San Diego, and we were originally founded in 1903. We have 2,000 students, staff, researchers, and volunteers in our community. We produce about 700 research publications a year and receive an average of $214 million in sponsored research annually. And our mission at Scripps Oceanography is to understand and protect the planet and investigate the oceans, earth, and atmosphere to find solutions to our greatest environmental challenges. This webinar series is focused on two of our main research initiatives here at Scripps, the first being risk and resilience to hazards, and the second, human health and the oceans. Both will occur quarterly, so please stay tuned for upcoming webinars, which we will put on our website and drop in the chat in a bit. The goal of this series is to inform our industry partners of our latest research and innovations, applied research tools, and ways to collaborate with our scientists and community to find mutually beneficial solutions. Just some quick housekeeping items. This webinar will be recorded and the link will be available afterwards. We will email it to you and then also be available on our website. So please feel free to distribute it to your colleagues. Also, you can find the question and answer Q&A button icon on the bottom center of your screen. Please feel free to enter your questions throughout the presentation and we will hold them until the end. We will have time for Q&A and discussion at the end. So if for some reason we're not able to your question during that time, we will make sure we follow up with you afterwards. And with that, I am very pleased to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Margaret Leinen, who is the Director of Scripps Institution of Oceanography and Vice Chancellor for Marine Sciences at the University of California, San Diego. Dr. Leinen currently serves as a member of the Executive Planning Group of the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. She is on the Distinguished Leadership Council of the Joint Ocean Commission Initiative and is an elected member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. She is also the vice chair of the research board of the $500 million Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative. And from 2016 to 2018, she served as a U.S. science envoy, focusing on ocean science in Latin America, East Asia, and the Pacific. Margaret has served as a president of the American Geophysical Union, chair of the Atmospheric and Hydrospheric Science section of the American Academy for the Advancement of Science, and president of the Oceanography Society. She serves on the boards of the National Council for Science and the Environment and Science Counts. She also served as vice chair of the International Geosphere Biosphere Program and is on the board of the Global Change of the National Research Council, National Academy of Sciences. Margaret also served for 7 years at the National Science Foundation as Assistant Director for Geosciences and Coordinator of Environmental Research and Education. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Margaret, to kick off the presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Vanessa. And thank you to all of you who tuned in today. And I'm looking forward to being able to talk with you a little about the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, and especially how it can intersect with industry, private sector. So I know that I looked at the people that signed up, and there's really a broad array that goes far beyond the private sector and corporate business. So what I'm going to do is give you a little introduction to the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, sort of a Ocean Decade 101. And I promise you that I will get to some material that is a deeper dive into things of interest to industry, corporate, and the private sector. And then I'm hoping to leave quite a bit of time for discussion. So why a UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development? Well, the brightly colored tiles here represent the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. So these are goals that were established a few years ago and are meant to be goals that we would achieve by 2030. The blue one that I've circled, Sustainable Development Goal 14, is shorthanded by the UN as life below water, but it's really everything associated with the ocean. And it's very closely related to several of those other goals, for example, climate change. And I always say it's not for nothing that climate change and the oceans are joined at the hip there between 13 and 14. But if you also think about issues like sustainable cities and communities, clean water and sanitation, uh, affordable and clean energy, so many of, and life on land is number 15. So many of those are related to ocean science. And as the UN has been looking at this array of sustainable development goals, they found that sustainable oceans also, whether it's climate, food resources, hazard resilience, transportation, more than 90% of global trade is marine trade, environmental justice, etc. They all have deep roots in ocean science. And just a few years ago, the UN completed its first World Ocean Assessment. And its overarching conclusion was that we're running out of time to start managing the ocean sustainably. So all of this led to a lot of discussion about how to move progress on Sustainable Development Goal 14 more quickly. And that resulted at the end of December in 2017 in a UN General Assembly resolution establishing the decade of 2021 to 2030 as the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. And the goal was to really accelerate progress in reaching sustainable development for SDG 14. Our vision for SDG 14 is the science we need for the ocean we want. And our mission is to transform ocean science to ocean science solutions for sustainable development, connecting people and our ocean. So what is that ocean we want that is so glibly stated in the mission, the science we need for the ocean we want? For this, the UN engaged in a preparatory phase from 2018 through 2020 that was managed by an executive planning group. And I have the privilege of serving on that executive planning group. And we engaged in a great deal of outreach, not only to the science community, but also to governments, to the private sector, to philanthropy, to advocacy organizations, to say, what is the ocean we want? And that resulted in this set of outcomes, the ocean we want. And they're really stated in a way that our neighbor could understand, or our children, or people who aren't scientists themselves, especially ocean science scientists. But they are shown here, and I'm not going to read all of them, but they're meant to be aspirational, and they're meant to be something that appeals to people's understanding of what they want. So a clean ocean. If the scientists in the group might say, well, what does that mean? You know, how clean? How soon? Are you just talking about pollution? Are you talking about other aspects? What do you mean by that? And the outcomes are not really meant to define all of that, but to set aspirational goals for outcomes. That third one there, a predicted ocean, really refers to our ability to model the ocean at a level of complexity and a level of detail that allows us to make predictions about the future, whether that's sea level rise or harmful algal blooms, being able to understand the ocean at that level. That goal that I've illustrated with all the children there at a museum, a transparent and accessible ocean, is meant to really focus on the issue of uh, the accessibility of uh, understanding of the ocean. Uh, the and then lastly, an inspiring and engaging ocean. And this is meant to reflect our understanding that the uh, the ocean is, we like to visit the ocean as tourists. We're engaged and inspired by the complexity and the biodiversity of the ocean. And it's always an area um, of great uh, inspiration. And we talk about it regularly in terms of what we know about the ocean versus what we know about the land and what we know about um, the and what we even comparing it to Mars. I want to stop for a second. I saw the note from Brant saying that the image is frozen, but you can still hear me. And I want to make sure that that's the case. Um, I'm, I always have a little bit dicey internet, but as long as you can still see the images, we're okay. Great, thanks very much. So those outcomes are the ocean we want. So in this diagram, we're looking at the ocean we have with its problems, the ocean we want, and then everything in here is the role of science, the science we need to get there. So let's unpack that a little bit more. These are some of the scientific challenges that we have uh, heard from the scientific community that would allow us to reach those outcomes. So these get a little more specific. Understand and beat marine pollution, protect and restore ecosystems and biodiversity, sustainably feed the global population, develop sustainable and equitable ocean economy, unlock ocean-based solutions to climate change, and increase community resilience to ocean hazards. So those are all challenges that are pointed at for people. The next two, 7 and 8, are really tools to get there. Expand the global ocean observing system and create a digital representation of the ocean. And by this, I don't just mean a digital map of the ocean, but really a map in addition to a digital, uh, an understanding of biodiversity, an understanding of currents, an understanding of other elements of the ocean that can be represented digitally and that can feed in to our ability to predict and model. Number 9 really is focused on capacity, developing skills, knowledge, and technology for all, so that all nations can have what they need to study their ocean and to contribute to its sustainability. And then finally, changing humanity's relationship with the ocean. And this is focused on letting the world understand how much the ocean impacts their daily life, so that at the end of the decade, even people in landlocked areas would understand that they had a stake in the ocean, that it's important for their sustainability. We've then established a hierarchy of actions that would take place. So how do we start approaching all of those challenges? And this is a hierarchy of actions. On the left, at the broadest level, are what we call programs. They would be global or regional in scale. They'd contribute to one or more of those decade challenges and be long-term, multiple years, interdisciplinary, and typically multinational. So you could imagine something that we already have, like Argo and the Argo float system, as an example of something that's global, that can contribute to multiple challenges that's long-term, multinational, et cetera. So that's to give you a sense of really big actions, and that this would typically include component projects and activities. Then at the next level of specificity would be projects, and those would be discrete and focused undertakings with a shorter duration, and they would typically contribute to an identified decade program. So if we were going to map the entire seafloor, a decade project might be mapping one region of the seafloor. And then finally, decade activities. And these would typically be one-off or standalone activities. And they can form part of a program, or they can relate directly to one of those challenges or an outcome. So this is something that that would be of much shorter duration and a one-off activity. And then finally, on the right side, decade contributions are really either financial contributions or in-kind contributions that support the decade through provision of resources. And they can either be for costs related to implementation or coordination costs. So that's the hierarchy of actions. And I'll also take a moment to apologize. I have remodeling going on next door, and I hope that the sound isn't too distracting for you. So this then shows you the whole plan, the ocean we have, actions and scientific work at many different levels, contributing to our being able to address those decade challenges and have the outcomes that give us the ocean we want. A central element of this ocean decade is the notion of transformation of where we are to where we would like to be. And for example, our science is largely competent for diagnosing problems as opposed to providing solutions and motivating action, which is where we want to go. Our observing system for climate, and we have an observing system for climate, and we have an emerging data service, but we really need to expand that into ocean data on many other topics and an information system that draws on the past, that is good for the present, and that will work for the future. We also have major knowledge gaps and in general, weak ocean literacy. And we want to move toward having an ocean literate and well-informed public for well-informed decisions. On the funding side, most of our funding base for ocean science is in research mode, but we want to work to having a clear value chain that leads to resourcing and commitment for the science that is aimed at solutions. And then finally, developing capacity from the hugely uneven capacity that we have now, especially in the developing countries, to clear development, transfer of technology, and no one left behind in their ability to solve ocean science problems for sustainable development. So let's move from that overview of what the ocean science decade is all about to some of the areas that I think are important for the private sector, for corporate, and for advocacy and environmental organizations as well. So these are a few of the key ocean management domains that are out there. They aren't all of them. So as you look through this, for example, you won't see marine transportation. And I just told you that more than 90% of global trade is marine trade. So that's just giving you an example of many different areas of management that are that may be missing. And I think that the thing to do as you look at this is think about all of the potential for goods and services in the blue economy that will lead toward our being able to effectively manage those domains, whether it's coastal zone management and adaptation, whether it's oceanographic services, early warning systems. Embedded in all of that are opportunities for the blue economy to really focus on providing the tools for management, whether those tools are physical tools, whether those are modeling tools, whether those are procedural tools, and services that could be used in order to undertake management. Then I'd like to talk a little bit more about capacity building. So this is obviously a map. It's a sort of weird map, as you can see. Most of you are familiar with the idea of equal area maps. This is an equal scientific publication map. And so each country is sized on the map in relation to the number of scientific publications in marine science that nation has published in the last 10 years. So you see that the US, China, Europe as taken as a whole, Japan, Australia are large, and most of the developing world is quite small. And you see that especially in Africa, where essentially, other than South Africa and a couple of the Gulf states, that Africa has had very little development and capability in marine science. So a major goal of the UN decade is to develop that capability, not just through workshops or training people, but through partnering with scientists and governments or other organizations in those countries, and with partnering with aid agencies to develop the physical capacity to do the work, as well as the training and intellectual capacity. So what are some of the roles that industry and private sector partners can play in this? You have a significant opportunity to play a lead role and make significant contributions to ensure the equitable and sustainable development of the ocean economy. First, as an ocean steward, so several people have asked about the issue of how we define a sustainable blue economy. And I think that in each of your areas, you have a sense of what those sustainability issues are out there, whether those are sustainable in terms of extraction from the ocean, whether they're sustainable in terms of inputs to the ocean, whether it's sustainable in the sense of the life cycle of materials you use. But you can play a major role by being leaders in ensuring that your business is stewarding the blue economy through being blue. Obviously, you are all drivers of technological innovation to enhance ocean science and scaling up solutions. And as you look at those management challenges or the scientific issues, many of them are going to depend on technology innovation. And again, whether that is physical technology or whether that's modeling and predictive technology. And I think that those are all going to be huge opportunities for the blue economy. Industry and the private sector are the employer of the next generation of ocean science professionals. And so you play a very important role there. You're leaders in innovative public-private partnerships, and those are another opportunity to contribute to the sustainable development of the ocean economy. And then your science-based knowledge generators and users of science-based knowledge. And so there too, there's a great opportunity. I've highlighted a couple of of publications that have come out recently. The Ocean Decade is under the management of the International Oceanographic Commission, IOC, which is part of UNESCO and the UN. And the IOC works closely with the UN Global Compact, which is a private sector focused group to talk about and to develop information on opportunities. And these are just two examples of documents that have come out recently on advancing science for sustainable ocean business and a blue resilience brief toward a more resilient and sustainable blue economy. And there are many more that are joint publications of IOC, the Decade, and the UN Global Compact. So if you just look up the UN Global Compact's website or the Ocean Decade website, which is oceandecade.org, you'll be able to find a wealth of other material. So why engage in this? I think that some of the big opportunities for the business sector are to leverage resources through national and international collaborations with other companies and through national and international collaboration with science. You can de-risk projects through greater access to science-based knowledge, pursue emerging business opportunities that I believe are really going to be fostered by the attention that we'll have as a result of the Ocean Decade. And then to connect with global leaders in ocean science to co-create solutions to business challenges. The graphic here shows some of the research outputs that we expect to come out of the decade and their potential for commercial application. So whether that's real-time data systems that will drive technological innovations in ocean observations, whether it's ocean models that really create the opportunity for science-based risk assessments for not just for reinsurance, but for cities, counties, government at all levels, ocean models that can be used as input for management of fisheries, whether it's stakeholders and analysis mapping for market research. We're seeing in what has been proposed as part of the decade, all of these various kinds of research outputs. We really envision this as an opportunity to co-design the science we need for the ocean we want, and to foster multi-sector and transdisciplinary collaboration and the establishment of innovative partnerships. In October of last year, the IOC made a call for proposals for UN Decade programs, those large global multi-year, multinational activities. The proposals were due in January of this year. There were about 250 that were submitted, and they touch on every single possible area of interest to ocean, whether that's expansion of existing observing systems like Argo, whether it's expansion and development of capacity building platforms, whether it's partnership with global aid agencies to provide resources for the developing world to participate. Every single possible idea was out there. And most of them included partners from the private sector. So I think that we're off to a good start with that, and we expect that there will be other opportunities. We'll be having a call for projects as part of those programs this next year, and that will be a further opportunity to partner. And the IOC has created a global stakeholder forum to actively manage communities of practice that will collaborate online and in person. So some of the colored ornaments in this stakeholder forum include national committees, and the U.S. has established a national committee for the Ocean Decade, which is being managed by the Ocean Studies Board of the National Academy of Science. The Ocean Studies Board itself includes members of the private sector, as does the Committee for the U.S. participation in the decade. The U.S. National Committee had a competition in December called Ocean Shots, and it was meant to be the equivalent of moonshots, to just put out big ideas and get those out in front of people. In January, there was an opportunity for all of us to get together and to talk about everything that had been submitted, and to pull together from those ideas more collaboration. And that's ongoing now. Then the IOC has established regional, sectoral, or thematic stakeholder platforms. And we're in the process now of seeing a number of especially regional stakeholder platforms to pull together ideas in specific regions like the tropical Atlantic, the Caribbean, the Pacific Island states. And then the Ocean Decade Alliance is a group of funders, philanthropic organizations, as well as governmental agencies who are putting resources on the table for UN Decade activities. And then, of course, Decade implementing partners. And these are the groups that are going to be organized to carry out those programs and projects. IOC has also developed a communication strategy and hired communication specialists to carry it out. It's called Generation Ocean, or GenO, and it's a global campaign that will tackle one of the biggest challenges of our generation, helping us to reverse this decline in ocean health through knowledge-based action. And the campaign will feature stories of people connected to various ocean issues and the ways in which they are using knowledge and science to find solutions to deliver the ocean we want. It's focused primarily on social media and dedicated websites. The motto is "The Ocean We Want." And you can tell from this that the first target for this is really young people, whether those are school-aged children or they're those in their 20s to 30s. It's really a campaign to try to provide that inspiration and the knowledge that the Ocean Decade is going to generate the science that will help us achieve the goals of the ocean we want. So how could you engage as a part of the private sector? Or I know we have many NGOs and advocacy organizations on the webinar today. There will be more calls for Ocean Decade projects and Ocean Decade actions. So you can certainly respond to one of those calls as they come out to propose your own ideas about how to act on the challenges and how to reach the goals. Or you can host or participate in Ocean Decade events, whether those are webinars, whether those are workshops to pull together people around an idea. And you don't have to wait for the Ocean Decade to say, we need a webinar or we need an activity focused on X. You can say, we think we need it, and propose it to the Ocean Decade. For example, on Monday of this week, I was on an international webinar that focused on the role of women in ocean science for the UN decade. There have been other webinars that focused on various communities, indigenous communities, communities for capacity building. If you wanted to try to engage at the global level on ideas about how to use the opportunities for ocean observations for the private sector, you could join with others who are in that sector or have that same interest and propose to host a virtual webinar on that. You can certainly engage with the National Decade Committee or contribute to regional planning processes. And we understand that the National Academy's Ocean Decade group is going to be having another event soon. The date hasn't been announced, but we know that they're trying to take the next step from those ocean shots to getting people together around specific themes to propose actions in the US. Then you can communicate on the decade to your networks, whether those are your employees, your web news, social media, podcasts, etc., and talk about how you see your company or your NGO or your advocacy organization working toward the goals of the decade. And then support the Gen-O campaign. So those are some specific ways that you could engage. So what I'm posing is the open question about how you see yourself joining this effort and coming together to realize the opportunity the Ocean Decade provides. And there's a specific reason that I use this image. That's for those of you who are familiar with it, it's called a bait ball, in which small fish school together to provide opportunities for them all and protection from them all, for them all. And I think that it's a great image for us to think about how we can come together to make opportunities that weren't there before the UN decade. It really serves, it's not a funding agency, it serves as a framework that we can use to enhance the opportunity for whatever it is that we do by having this megaphone around the ocean and having people be much more familiar with thinking about it, thinking about the blue economy, thinking about ocean sustainable development. So how do we achieve the ocean we need for the future we want in the US and elsewhere? And I think that's up to us to define. So I'm going to stop there. I put the Decade website on the image here, and I will stop screen sharing, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Great. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Margaret. Again, everybody, please feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A icon at the bottom center of your screen, and we will open it up for discussion. So it looks like we have got some submissions, and I can start with Martha, who is asking, how does mapping the seafloor by 2030 tie together with the other mapping projects in context of the UN decade?
Well, this is an idea that has been developing for at least a decade, the idea of mapping the entire seafloor. There's an incredibly small percentage of the seafloor that has been mapped in high resolution. And you often hear the statement that that we know less of the ocean than we do of Mars. That's not right. We know a lot about the ocean, but what is true is that the ocean has not been mapped in as great a detail as Mars has, because we can map Mars with satellites, and the ocean isn't amenable to that. And so there's been a growing call for being able to map the seafloor through a number of organizations. And they are using, this is a great example of using the decade as a platform to call for the mapping of the seafloor and to engage all nations that have the resources to do that, to really have as a goal for this decade mapping everything. So that's here it's a great example of group using the decade as a framework to achieve something that has been a goal of theirs for quite a long time.
Great, thanks, Margaret. And then there was a follow-up question onto that was in terms of collaborating on mapping, what platform is preferred? Are people doing through Esri or through other platforms?
There is, well, first there is an international group. The US representatives are at NOAA for establishing the database for all of the mapping data. So that's the repository is being developed that way. The coordination is through JEBCO, and I'm sorry I don't remember the words that go with JEBCO, but it is the organization that it develops the satellite maps of the seafloor that we have from altimetry, and is responsible for naming features on the seafloor and so forth. So it's the coordinating body, and that's an international body.
Great. All right, we've got some questions that have come in. There's one from Colleen asking about, does the Ocean Decade or this initiative address the problem of marine litter from single-use packaging and plastics? Is there a role for extended producer responsibility or shared responsibility policies as a way for the private industry to participate and support a healthy ocean system and economy?
Yes, and marine litter sort of comes under that first outcome of a clean ocean. And probably for most of the world, if I say a clean ocean, they think about marine plastic litter in the ocean as opposed to pesticides or human waste or whatever. So that's a great example. And what we saw in the proposals that were submitted to the decade were a couple of proposals that are policy focused and are looking for ways to engage the entire community in keeping waste out of the ocean, because once it's in, it is incredibly difficult to remove. And so the focus has been on how do we keep plastic out of the ocean. And then there's another one that talked about, that was really kind of a chemical engineering approach. How do we develop plastics that will decompose in salt water with light? So, and that's a big challenge, because many of the things that we put in plastic contain salt in the solution, either as a stabilizer or whatever. So, but the idea is that if you had something that would break down in the ocean once it was there, and not just break down to little pieces, but really dissolve.
Great. All right, we've got a question here. How can we incentivize the private sector to engage in these initiatives, especially given the time commitment?
Well, I think that, all of you who are in the private sector understand, if you look at all of this, you could be thinking about, what would I like to have from the science community? How could I take advantage of this? How can I get them to do the science I need so that I can develop products and practices and services to give us the ocean we want? And there, I think that it's really a question of engaging with the ocean science community to talk about what is that you need. And I think that there's a tremendous amount of interest in developing those kinds of activities under this framework. So I would say that it is not so much trying to move the whole decade as trying to move the group of people that you think are going to be most useful to you, and saying, we'd like to develop a project around this. And what are the potential funding sources that you know about and that we know about in doing that?
Great. Thank you. All right. We've got some questions here involving startups. So one question here from Carlos is, how is the UN Decade Program seeking to help young startups to develop new technologies? And is there increasing interest in the venture-backed startups contributing to sustainable ocean development?
Carlos, this is something that's coming, and we've had several discussions in IOC or with IOC about how we would um, how we might have some activities that bring together startups and the science community, independent of, for example, here Scripps brings together scientists from Scripps with uh, startup and non-startup partners, but that gives you access to us. And while it's great, it doesn't necessarily give you access to everybody. So there's a lot of discussion around how we could use the Ocean Decade process to have some broader conversations. So, for example, if you were interested in things that had to do with ocean acidification, to be able to have some roundtables around the ocean acidification science and ocean acidification uh, technology, whether that's measurement technology or how you would design systems for monitoring or whatever. And there's a lot of interest in doing this. And I think that this is one of the things that we've talked about, engaging some of the philanthropists that are interested in the area of startup companies and technology to help us facilitate that kind of communication and collaboration. But I think it's a great question, and one that you could frame in the and sort of throw that into the system to say, I'm interested in this kind of collaboration, and I'd like to get it more than the scientists that I know. Could we have a webinar or a virtual workshop or whatever in that way? It's kind of a, you're hearing a refrain from me. It's a make your own decade. How can you, it's like a Christmas tree, and it's for us to put the ornaments on it. And think about what kind of ornaments would make it look beautiful to you, and then push on IOC and the decade to help you create those ornaments.
Thank you, Margaret. That's a great description. And I think the next question really dovetails on that. It's how can my company collaborate with Scripps to advance the initiatives of the UN Decade of Ocean Science?
Well, Scripps is deeply involved in this, and I was trying not to make this a Scripps commercial, but we talked about those Ocean Decade programs, and Scripps faculty and researchers were responsible for the lead on about 5 of those big proposals, and were participants in probably about 10 or 15 others. So we are deeply involved in this, and we're kind of waiting to see what the decade says in terms of are they accepting that program as is? Did they get 5 proposals that were all focused on a similar idea, and they want us all to come together? But then we'll be off and running with that. And we have as a mandate for those big actions to involve the private sector, philanthropy, nonprofits, et cetera. So I think that as we find out what has been endorsed going forward, we're going to be able to give you a lot more information about how you could join us in doing that. And then I just think that we're so involved with this process. I can imagine, various webinars and workshops at Scripps that will be open to lots of different partners that will be continually saying, here's where the Ocean Decade is with this topic. Let's keep talking, and let's jump on that and work from it.
Great, thank you. We have a few questions surrounding seafloor mining. So question from Michael McGivern is, how concerned are you about seafloor mining? And are there any substantive international norms, laws being established for responsible mining?
Such a great question, and such a concerning issue. So you'll notice that on one of those slides that I showed you, the seafloor mapping said, well, this could lead to seafloor mining. And there are many people that say, oh, yes, great. And there are many people that say, oh, my gosh, no. And I think that uh, from a conservation and biodiversity standpoint, we're very concerned about seafloor mining, mostly because those substantive international norms or laws for what responsible mining is are not well developed. And we do have, we're in this phase where the nations um, that have already established claims for seafloor mining are supposed to be developing their environmental analysis. And one of the issues is that the environmental analysis is not strongly defined. There's an overall architecture, but it doesn't specify exactly what needs to be done. And so that means that the environmental basis for those assessments is going to be highly varied. And we think that that's going to be an issue. A second piece is that there are few demonstration experiments that have given us any kind of sense of what the degree of disturbance is for different technologies. And so the scientific community is out there trying to guess, how much disruption there will be, how deep the disruption will be, how far the waste from the mining would be transported in the deep ocean, and therefore how can we say this is what the impact will be when we don't even know some of those basic things. So we have really been arguing for some very small demonstration experiments to allow people to get a better handle on what impacts might be and what we need to have from those environmental assessments. I'm sorry it's such a long question, but I haven't even, talked at length about it. But great question.
Great. Thank you, Margaret. All right, we've got some more. Oh, we have another. Let's see. Here's a question. Through this framework, what is the role of the private sector in driving policy and regulations regarding ocean activities?
This is a place where the participation of governments in the ocean decade is really important, because governments are the groups that establish policy, or government-like groups are the ones that just determine policy. And what we're really looking for is to work with them to understand what they need. So great example is marine protected areas. So right now, the goal is 30 by 30% of the seafloor protected at some level by 2030. And we have quite a ways to go in 9 years to reach that. But there is substantially more of the seafloor that is protected, or the ocean, not just the seafloor, but the ocean, that's protected now than in the past. Very little of that has been assessed so that we know what's there. And very little of it is set up to be assessed routinely to know what the impact of that protection is. And so this is an area of great discussion between governments and the science community. How can they understand what's in the protected area and how it's changing as a result of protection, and do it without bankrupting the country to be able to make that assessment. And so that's a great area of interplay. So they're looking for us to give them techniques and methods that they could use, and to have those based on science. And if you think about virtually any other kind of policies for seafloor mining and policies for fisheries, it's going to require stronger collaboration with nations and the scientific community to have those policies be informed by science.
Great. Thank you, Margaret. I know we're kind of running low on time. Do you think we have time for one more?
Sure.
Okay. How can private funders to basic ocean scientific research engage in the science we need, given the quite applied nature of the science agenda?
Well, I think that one of the things we're trying to show is that it's a spectrum from from very basic research to what I call solution research. It's still pretty basic, but it's directed toward a societal problem. And then from there to applied research, which is really sort of taking that solution science and seeing how applicable it is to other regions. And then there's the actual application. And it's a spectrum. And I think that we're interested, clearly, with the kind of management goals that I showed you, we're interested in activating that entire spectrum. So I think that this is going to be a time when we'll see a lot more attention paid to the application side of the spectrum, in addition to the solution science.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Margaret. And I know we are kind of running down to the wire, so we will make sure to collect the questions and follow up with you afterwards. But I want to thank Margaret again for this great presentation. We really appreciate spending the time in addressing this topic. We did drop some links in the chat for more information on the UN Decade of Ocean Science and how to engage, and also our webinar website where we will have the recording of this as soon as it is available. And we will also be having upcoming webinars in May. We will be having a discussion about cliff erosion and vulnerable coastal infrastructure, and then another one for addressing human health in the oceans. Also wanted to say thank you to all of our marketing partners for getting the word out there for this webinar. And we look forward to collaborating with you. Please feel free to reach out to Gwen Nero, Director of Corporate Relations and Innovation, or myself directly. And yes, we look forward to collaborating with you. And thank you again for your time and participation.
And I will, I'll look at the questions that we weren't able to get at and provide Vanessa with some short answers to those, and she can post them on your website.
Perfect. Thank you, Margaret. Great. Thanks again, everyone.